अनीता स्क्रीन शेयर स्टॉप कर देना थोड़ी देर. Good afternoon, everyone. I welcome you all in the online classes for MA English Semester 4, jointly organized by Rajkumar Kevalramani, Kanya Mahavidyalaya, Nagpur, Vasantrao Naik, Government Institute of Arts and Social Sciences, Nagpur, Mahila Mahavidyalaya, Nagpur, and J.M. Patel College, Bhandara. Today we have among us Dr. Urmila Dabir as a resource person. Madam is Honorable Chairperson, Board of Studies English of RTM Nagpur University, Nagpur. Many books, and Madam is working as a principal of Rajkumar Kevalramani Kanya Mahavidyalaya, Nagpur since last 15 years. Many books are edited by Ma'am. A number of research publications at national and international level are to her credit. She has been honored with many awards and recognitions at university and national level. Madam is a member of almost all the apex bodies of RTM Nagpur University, Nagpur. It is a pleasure to welcome you, ma'am. I request you to conduct the session. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, Madhuri. A very good afternoon to all. Today we are going to take up a very important poem, The Wasteland, by a modern poet, T.S. Eliot. Now, before moving on to the poetry, there are certain important aspects to be dealt with as the background portion of that particular age. Because it is said that the age which is there is depicted in the works of the writer. So much importance has been laid on these background portions which are there. The poetry Wasteland is a very big poem. So without wasting much of the time, we will move on to the background portion. The first aspect is the literary modernism. Now, what is actually literary modernism? Literary modernism originated in the 19th and early 20th century. Now, every age has its own, you can say, peculiarity. It has its own important characteristics. We have seen the Romantic age had its own characteristics. The Elizabethan age had its own characteristics. In the same way, modern era had its own characteristics. So it is characterized by a self-conscious break with the traditional ways of writing. And it was in both poetry, prose, fiction writing. And it experimented with different literary forms and expressions. In Romantic age also we saw that they experimented with a new form of poetry that was close to nature, which had simple language. So in this particular literary modernism, you can see that they were breaking up from the traditional way of writing. And this movement was driven by a conscious desire to overturn all the traditional modes of representation. And they wanted to express new sensibilities of their time in which they were living. And they had seen the First World War. They had experienced the horrors of the First World War. And what type of, you can say, conditions they were in, what sufferings they underwent. All these things had to be reflected in their poetry. So they had these particular things in their mind when they wrote the writings. So modernist writing engages with the technological advances because it was the age of technology also. Many new scientific discoveries and inventions were taking place. So technological advances were also seen. And because of this, there was change in society. And the age was moving towards modernity. And they were moving into, or rather ushering into a new century, that is the 20th century. So all these things are included in the literary modernism. Then you have the Irish literary revival. Now, this Irish literary revival is also called as Celtic Twilight. It was actually unfolding of the Irish literary talent in the late 19th and 20th century. And it included everything: poetry, music, art, and literature. And because of the English colonial rule, Gaelic heritage was viewed from the political context. And they had a very great literary heritage. This revival was inspired by the nationalistic pride of the Gaelic revival and the Gaelic League. And in 1893, to revive the Irish language and culture, this was formed, that is the Irish Literary Revival. This movement developed into a vigorous literary force, and it centered on the poet and playwright William Butler Yeats. He contributed to the foundation of Abbey Theatre, and this Abbey Theatre was the first Irish national theatre in which he wrote a few plays. The Irish Literary Theatre was established in 1898. It also excelled in production of peasant plays. And in addition to Yeats, George Russell composed works of enduring interest. Other notable younger contemporaries were Augustine Clark, then Oliver was there, Saint John Goethe was there. The Irish Republican movement had its poets like Patrick Henry Pearse, Thomas Macdo, Joseph Plunkett, all executed in 1916 for their part in Easter Rising. So this also Irish literary revival has its own literary importance, which had its impact on the literature of that particular time. Now, one of the most important poets of that time was Ezra Pound. Ezra Pound is generally considered the poet who was most responsible for defining and promoting a modernistic aesthetic in poetry. He was born on 30th October 1885 and he died on 1st November 1972. And he was an expatriate American poet, a critic, a major figure in the early modernist poetry. In his early teens of the 20th century, he opened a seminal exchange of work and ideas between British and American writers. He was a significant contributor to poetry, and he completed 2 years of college in Peninsula. Then he moved to Italy, and he was involved in fascist politics. And he did not return to the United States until 1945, where he was arrested on the charges of treason for broadcasting fascist propaganda by the radio to the United States during World War II. Ezra Pound's political career, in the interest of recognizing his poetic achievements, was avoided the prize of peace and Catholics, and he has contributed to poetry which began in the early 20th century, and his role in developing imagism, a movement stating precision and economy of language, is very, very notable. Then we move on to the Georgian poetry. Georgian poetry refers to a series of anthologies which showcased the work of School of English Poetry that established itself during the early years of the reign of King George of the United Kingdom. These Georgian poets were very strictest, had their own definition. Their works appeared in series of 5 anthologies named Georgian Poetry. It was published by Harold Munro, which was edited by Edward Marsh. And the first volume, which contained poems written between 1911 and 1912. And this particular group of Georgian poetry included Rupert Brooke, Robert Graves, a famous poet, B.H. Lawrence, Walter de la Mare, Sigmund Sassoon, and John Drinkwater. It was not until the final 2 volumes that the decision was taken to include female poets. Now we come to T.S. Eliot. T.S. Eliot is a very major poet of this particular century, and he has contributed a lot to the modern poetry. And his Love Song of Ruffok, which was published in 1950, is very, very important. He wrote The Wasteland while recovering from exhaustion. And this particular poetry, Wasteland, is an important landmark in the history of the poetry, and it is much talked of the poetry of the 20th century. Eliot has also won Order of Merit and Nobel Prize in Literature in 1948, and he spent most of his life in Europe, and he passed away in London, in England, in 1965. Now, before moving on to the 5 sections of the poetry, I would like to introduce to you certain important aspects of this particular poetry, the wasteland. Now, as I said, that this particular poetry is divided into 5 sections. The first section is the burial of the dead. The second is the game of the chess. The third is the fire sermon. Fourth, death by water. And fifth, what the thunder said. This particular poetry, as I said, was written in 1921 in Lausanne, Switzerland, when the poet was recovering after serious breakdown in health, and because of his personal health crisis and the other crisis which was there, and his nerve shattering experiences of the impact of World War I, had a gloomy picture of human predicament as it is presented in this particular poetry, The Wasteland. This particular poetry was first published in serial form in the Criterion, and before publishing, the poet had sent this rough draft to Ezra Pound, who suggested a lot of, you can say, modifications, and these modifications were carried out. Then there are various legends which are there. Now, what is actually wasteland? Wasteland is the mythical background that is used over there. Then, on the eve of the composition of the wasteland, T.S. Eliot was reading Jessie Weston's book From Ritual to Romance. And the poet himself acknowledged that he was deeply influenced by these works. And he has used primitive myths and legends from the mythical backgrounds to the poem, which are derived from these books. Now, what are the different legends? Because when I'll be explaining on the poetry, these particular legends or these particular names would appear. The first legend is the Holy Grail. This Holy Grail is a cup or dish, which is a medieval legend. It is associated with the adventures of King Arthur and the knights of King Arthur. The Grail or the cup, which is there, actually it was used by Christ for the Last Supper, and in which the blood of the Savior was collected when he was crucified. It was not before this holy vessel was discovered to have acquired medicinal and miraculous property, and it became an object of devotion and worship. And the chapel for it was also built in several countries. Worships were organized, and the lance that was used to pierce the sides of Christ when he was crucified was also kept with it. But mysteriously, it disappeared from the chapel where it was kept, and a bold knight staked his life, and he took the task of searching for it. So the reference to the Grail legend also appears over here. Now, the Fisher King, this is another legend which comes over there. It is said that when a hazardous quest, that means a dangerous quest, was undertaken by Parsifal and his fellow adventurers, they arrived at a country ruled over by the prince named the Fisher. Now, it was one of the regions where the Grail was worshipped, and there was Chapel Perilous over there, which stood there. But now the condition of that chapel was very bad. It was in a dilapidated condition. It was wrecked down, you can say. And even the king, like the church, was a physical wreck. And it why these things had happened? Because he had committed the sin by his soldiery, by outraging the chastity of a group of nuns which were attached to the Grail Chapel. And because of that, Kingfisher became important. His land became dry, it became barren, and there was famine everywhere. The king was waiting with a hope that one day some knight of pure soul will come, and he will be have a ritual washing of his, and the king Fisher's sinful body would be purged, purified, and his health and energy would be renewed. So it was hoped that this rebirth of the king would be followed by the life-giving rains, because even the land was thirsty, the kingdom was under famine, and there was complete barrenness. So because of this rains, there would be fertility everywhere. So you have this reference to the fisher king. Then what is this mythical wasteland? The land of fisher king symbolizes decay and spiritual sterility. Now this wasteland is wasteland of the contemporary age, the 21st century, because now also we can see these things happening. When you read the poetry, you can see and you can connect all these things to the modern times, because you see in the contemporary times also there is decay, there is spiritual sterility. Now what is actually COVID there? It is disease, there is sick humanity, there is sickness which is causing because of the loss of faith and all these things which are taking place in our you can say universe which is there. So everything is degraded over here, and people are living like animals. So this is the symbolic importance of the mythical wasteland. Then you have a reference to Tiresias. This is the central figure of the poem, and he is the spectator and protagonist who looks at the wasteland and who tells us about the wasteland, how it is, and it is he who is narrating everything. He is connected with the story of King Oedipus also, King Oedipus of Thebes also. Now, what is the legend of King Oedipus, and what is his wasteland? Now, when we see Tiresias in the first place over there, it is a central and universal figure you can say in the symbol of Tiresias. Oedipus, the legend of King Oedipus is that he kills his father unknowingly, and he marries his own mother, and a curse of God falls upon him. There is plague, epidemic, destruction everywhere because of this dark and evil crime. Now Tiresias is a blind prophet. He is summoned by the king, and he is told of the shocking truth. And even the king himself is a plague spot. Now, everywhere you can see, because of this particular sin, the whole kingdom is utterly destroyed. The king has to undergo self-exile, and he has to undertake a penance to purify himself and to regain his strength again. So we see King Oedipus even in the modern contemporary times. Now moving on to the sections of this particular poetry. The first section is the burial of the dead. Now what is this burial of the dead? The opening section of the wasteland and the title of the first section is the burial of the dead. Now it has two references. First is the burial of the dead fertility god. In those days, there was a practice that they used to bury in the form of, you can say, plant or in the soil, and then there would be life. So, what does it symbolize? It symbolizes life. It symbolizes rebirth. So, the two important meanings of the burial of the dead can be: first, the burial of the dead fertility god, and the burial service which is given to the dead, which is performed in the church. And in both the cases, there is a rebirth, because new life regenerates when you bury the fertility god, and when a person is dead and he is buried, there is again rebirth. So both suggest that it is followed by rebirth. But modern contemporary wasteland which is there, it is spiritually dead. They do not have any values, they do not have any, you can say, faith in spirituality. And because of this spiritual death, the rebirth or spiritual regeneration is very, very painful death, because it would remind of them of their sins it would remind them of their bad deeds that they have done. So for them, it begins with that April is the cruelest month. Actually, April is the beginning of the spring season. And spring means new life. Spring means rebirth. Spring means beauty. But for the wastelanders, April is the cruelest month. Why? Because it signifies rebirth. And they do not wish to have any rebirth. They do not wish to have any spiritual effort. They like to have death in life. They do not want any values in them. So for them, April is the coolest month. And they do not want to make any efforts to have the spiritual rebirth. Now we have this line in contrast with Chaucer's prologue, because in Chaucer's prologue, they say that April mixes memory with desire. So they are reminded of the fertility god. They undertake pilgrimage. Again, undertaking pilgrimage means you are alive to the spirituality, the religion which is there. But for the modern wastelanders, they do not wish to have the, you can say, spiritual rebirth. So for them, April is the coolest month. Then you have the representation of the humanity over there. And there is a light chat between two inhabitants of the wasteland. And it is overheard and remembered by Tiresias. I said he's the protagonist, and he himself is one of the speakers. Now, who is the speaker over there? One of the two is a German Princess Mary. And this German Princess Mary goes globe-trotting. She goes from one place to another, throttling here and there. She's a globe-trotter. Now, what does that symbolize? It symbolizes that she does not have any roots. She's going from one place to another. So there is rootlessness in the modern times. The princess remembers only a cousin, and this cousin with whom she may have had sex relations. She does not remember her parents, her brothers, her sister, nobody, because she does not have roots in the family or in the community. So it suggests the rootlessness of the nation. It suggests the rootlessness of the culture which is there. So the modern humanity is like the German princess, who entirely lives on a physical plane, and she has forgotten religion. She has forgotten moral values, and in winter they want to go to south in search of physical pleasures. Now then the wasteland is surveyed. And what is the wasteland like? It is dry, barren, dead. There are stones, but these stones are dry. There is no sound of water. There is only hot sun. Everything, you can say, is spiritually dead. There is no relief, no shelter from the scorching heat which is there. Only under the shade of the red rock. Now, what does the red rock symbolizes? It symbolizes the Christian church. And there lies the hope for humanity in seeking shelter by accepting the message of Christ. So man should seek the protection of God or supernatural so that he can be cured of all these barrenness which is there in him. Now there is a shadow. What does that shadow signify? In youth, that is in morning, it is behind you. The shadow, when you are young, it is the morning of your life, so the shadow is behind you. In the old age, it is evening, so it is before you, ready to meet you. And what are we? What are we human beings? We are only a handful of dust. And this modern wastelander is afraid of death, and they are afraid of the anger of God. So they do not want to face death, and therefore they want to stay in the, you can say, in the warm April month, where they do not want to experience any freshness, life. They want to be spiritually dead only. Then we are introduced to two guilty love, which is there in the poetry. And the extract is there from German language, from Wagner's famous poetry, Tristan and Isolde. The other love episode is also guilty, which is taken from a German opera. And there is a reference to the Heisen girl. And she may be a princess recounting a moment of passionate intensity in her youthful love. But love both of Tristan and Heisenberg is guilty. And hence, instead of bringing any fulfillment, there is boredom and futility. So this is what is modern wasteland. Then we go to the heart of the modern wasteland, that is London. Now, this London, Paris can be any metropolitan city. It can be metropolitan city of, it can be Delhi, it can be Mumbai, it can be Bangalore, any metropolitan city in this particular world. There is a reference to the Tariff Pact. Now, in the olden times, even in India, but this was a practice in Egypt to forecast rise and fall of the Nile River. Now, again, river, what is river actually? It is the source of life and fertility. Unless and until the rivers are full of water, how can you have life and fertility? So, the pack of card was used to forecast the rise and fall of the Nile River. But now, this is generated because there is again a reference to Madame Sosostris. She's a fortune teller and she's in constant fear of the police because she's undertaking an illegal activity by using this pack of cards to give the clients about their fortune, how they would be having their life. So she is a fortune teller. Now there are some cards which are very, very important. The first card is of the drowned Phoenician sailor. It symbolizes fertility, and it is actually a fertility god whose image is thrown into the sea everywhere to symbolize the end of the summer. Now, it can also be connected to the immersion of the gods and goddesses like Ganesh we have, or we have Durga. And again, the next year, there is life again in the form of having the Lord at our place. So the first you can say is the drowned Phoenician sailor, and it is the fertility image is thrown into the sea, and everywhere you can see the end of summer, and again you have transformation taking place. Then you have the second image of Belinda. She is the beautiful lady of the rocks. She is the lady who is symbolizing the womanhood of the modern wasteland. You can see her again reappearing in the game of chess. Then you have a man with 3 staffs. He's the kingfisher, and he's a symbol of degenerating humanity. And there is a threefold remedy for him to come out of this degeneration. And what is that remedy? It is a threefold remedy, that is to give, to sympathize, and to control. Then there is a wheel. Now, this is the wheel of our destiny, because we are constantly going on the wheel of destiny from one end to the other. Then there is a one-eyed merchant, and his only one eye is open, that is the eye of sexuality. The other eye of religion is closed. Then there is the card of the hanged man. This is the dead fertility god or Christ, which was crucified, and because of that, you cannot find any values in the modern wasteland. He is hooded. Then you can see the crowd walking on the streets of London. But what is the existence of these people in the crowd? They walk with their eyes down. They do not have any existence. They are dull, boring, monotonous. So all these things which are there, you can see in this particular section. Then you have the unreal city, that is the London. But this is, again, you can have this modern wasteland. It can be any city, any metropolitan city where all these things can be seen. So the protagonist surveys the unreal city of London, and he moves over the London Bridge. And you have the nursery rhyme, the London Bridge is falling down, the London Bridge is falling down. Now this nursery rhyme, what does it represent? It represents the monotonous thing that is there. So the life of the modern wastelanders is completely monotonous. There is sterility, there is spiritual death, there is life and death. They are living, but they are only existing. And They do not have any value system in them. Now again you have to the end, you have Stetson, who is an acquaintance of Tyrese's, and he had met them. He meets again and he tells about the war that had taken place, and this refers to the World War, and he narrates his own experiences over there. And then he says that the dog is there, which is likely to pick up. Now, what does the dog mean over here? Dog means the conscious. But here, it wants to keep the dog away because it wants to keep its conscious away. They want to be spiritually dead. So, to conclude the first part, we can say the general theme of the wasteland is that it is a life in the contemporary world, which is life in death. We are living, but we have lost all our spiritual values. There is decay everywhere, there is degeneration, there is no proper functioning, there is no source of life and vitality, and there is no hope also. So, this is the first section, the burial of the dead. Now we come to the second section, that is the game of the chess. The game of the chess is again a very important part. Now we can see that one part of the poetry is not linked with the other. It is in fragments because this poetry was very big, and then it was, you can say, revised and re-revised, and because of that, this poetry appears to be fragmented. So one portion of the poetry has no connection with the other as such. Now, the second movement of the poem is entitled as the game of the chess. Now, this explores the failure of the sex relationships in the wasteland. Now, sex has only become as if it is a move or a counter move between men and women. It has lost its importance in family life also and everywhere. It is stale and it has become a dull routine. And we can see in the opening section that there are lots of quotations, phrases, which is very, very used by the poet. And one important aspect of W.B. Yeats is that in one line, W.B. Eliot is that in one line, he expresses a lot. And you can say that it is has a lot of meaning. Every word carries an important meaning. And there are lots of things which the poet conveys through a few lines also. So we can say that Eliot has used a poetic shorthand in his particular poem, The Wasteland. Now, there is a reference to a lady. Now, what is this lady? We had seen that there were a pack of cards and there was the lady of rocks. So this is the lady of the rocks on the tarot pack, the pack of cards which is there. And we are in the opening lines, there is a lot of explanation about, or you can say, description of the dressing table, cosmetics, and everything over there. There is a reference to Cleopatra also from Shakespeare's Antony and Cleopatra. And the description of the dressing table, the cosmetic also, it reminds of Alexander's poem, The Rape of the Lock. Because Belinda, when she dresses up, there are a lot of cosmetics spread over the table. And there are perfumes which rise up to the ceiling, which is very beautifully ornamented. And these lines remember us of Cymbeline in Diderot's Virgil. But the lady does not have anything common with Cleopatra and the greatness of Belinda also, because they're guilty of pettiness, the triviality of love that they have in the wasteland. Now, over the fireplace, a very beautiful fireplace is there, and over that fireplace is carved the picture of Philomela. Now, who was Philomela? The story of Philomela is also depicted here. Philomela was raped and her tongue was cut by her brother-in-law, and she had to undergo a lot of pain because of this humiliation. And the gods then transformed her into Nightingale of the Golden Voice. And from that time, Nightingale tells the story of her pain and suffering and humility. And her song goes on in the wasteland, but they do not understand the melody. They do not understand the pain of the wasteland. Her song is only a meaningless jug jug to the modern wastelanders. See, if we compare the wasteland that Eliot has given, we can see the thing still happening. So many Nirbhayas are raped and they do not get justice. And there is no transformation for those Nirbhayas also. But at least Philomela had a transformation in the form of Nightingale. So still the women are raped, they undergo pain, they undergo shame, they undergo humility, and there is no purification and transformation for them through suffering. So, what does it suggest? It suggests that there is degeneration of love into lust. And Philomel is an important symbol in this particular section. Now, we also come across in the following lines that we hear the footsteps of the lover who is coming, and his arrival is being waited by the lady. But they lead a very, very artificial life. And she's awaiting for her lover. And when she hears the footsteps, she becomes excited. And but this excitement is all, you can say, all superficial, and the conversation which is there between the lady and the lover does not convey anything that is real love in them. And now again you have such broken lines over there. She says thinking, nothing, nothing, and there is a complete, you can say, vacuum, mental vacuum in modern men and women of the wasteland. Then there is a noise. She says that it is the wind under the door. And then in excitement, you hear the echo of the words in Hamlet and Macbeth. And from the tempest, you have those are the pearls that were his eyes. These sentences or these words or these beautiful lines are narrated from the great poets, but they do not understand the significance. It is meaningless for them. They do not have any rhyme or any sense. It implies no spiritual significance to them, and they do not symbolize any transformation for them, and they do not have any purification also. This lady who becomes hysterical, and they have nothing to do. So there is no purpose of life, there is no purpose of anything. So she does not know what to do. She says, I want to, should I rush? And should I walk on the streets? And should I, what shall I do tomorrow? Because there is nothing that can follow them. But they have a routine life. So hot water at 10 and waiting for the knock at the door. And something exciting to happen to them. But when she is talking, there is no communication between both of them. And then she asks him that, are you alive or not? Is there anything in your head or not? Or your head is full of straw? This is a typical wastelander who sees nothing, who does nothing. He does not even live because it is life in death. He is merely a person who is life in death. And the modern wasteland has become even sterile. It does not lead to anything. No spiritual regeneration, nothing at all. And the wastelanders, it is said that, are in Rat's Alley, where the dead men was their bones. Now, this was the love that took place in the higher class. Now, coming to the lower class of the people at that particular age, or we can see this age also, we see the picture of Lil, who is talking to her friend, and she is in a city pub, and she tells her friend that Albert is coming home after a long time from war, but she has prematurely become old because she has taken a lot of pills to resolve her pregnancy. And if she does not take care of herself and improve her looks, Albert would definitely be attracted towards the other women. So you can see the disintegration in domestic life also. And what does all these things mean? It means only pleasure. And they go on talking to each other. When the pub tavern keeper asks them to leave, and both of them say good night to each other. And again, this good night, ladies, by the tavern man reminds of Ophelia's farewell speech. And this old lady, actually, she's not old, but she has become old because of the uh, pills that she has taken to terminate her pregnancy. And now she wants to look good. It also means that perhaps she's on the verge of death. Now, to summarize the second section is that it is a very cleverly built, and there is a contrast between high and low life. But though there is a contrast, there is a resemblance in life of both of them, because both the sections of the society have lost all meaning for that, and uh, they are leading death in life and death. They are suffering, but suffering should lead to purification. Like Philomel's suffering was led to purification, but there is no regeneration, but only death is there, because they do not want to undertake efforts to transform themselves. They do not want to undertake efforts to purify themselves. This is the modern wasteland. Coming to the third section, the fire sermon. The title of this particular section is taken from the sermon by Lord Buddha, in which he says that the world is burning in lust and passion. And there are thousands and thousands of evils, all destroying the values and the human beings. It also reminds of the Confessions of Saint Augustine, where he represents that lust is burning in a cauldron. A big cauldron is there, kadai as you call, and it is burning in lust, and all the evils are there, and the whole humanity is undergoing that. So both East and West have condemned all this as source of evil. Spirituality is dead for the modern humanity. There is no true love. Now, this particular section is like a sermon. Sermon means it is giving you some important lessons from the religion. Now, this section in which Tiresias is surveying the Thames River in autumn, the leaves have fallen down, and the wind is moving. The wind is moving, but there is no rustle of the wind. You can see the Thames is deserted. It is summertime. It is haunted, and you can see a lot of ladies over there seeking momentary pleasures. And you also see with them the sons of the rich business directors need in pleasure. And after having that, they leave that place. And you can see the empty bottles, cigarette cases, papers, handkerchiefs, all the reminders of the pleasures on their back. Today also, when you visit the sea beaches, the rivers, the you can say hill stations, after that, what do you see today? You see all these dirt, all this dirt left by the people. So this is a typical scene even today. So we can say that today also we are living in wasteland. So this wasteland is not, again I'm saying, it's not the wasteland of the time of T.S. Eliot, but it is the contemporary wasteland also. So in the olden days, it was said that water is a source of purification, regeneration. But modern man does not realize. Why? Because modern man, because of all the inventions which have been made, and they're using it for different wrong purposes. You can see that even the waters of the river is polluted. There are so many motorboats going on, and there is pollution. The river actually symbolizes spirituality, but now you can see spiritual degeneration over there. The river scene which is there again depicts the modern wasteland. Now, what does the protagonist do? It is mourning the pollution of the river waste. He's sitting on the bank of the river, fishing in the dull canal, and you can also see the sound of the senseless laughter of the London cloud. Memories crop upon him, and he has the memories of Byron's famous poem, lamenting his loss of freedom on the banks of Lake Leman, or the captive Jews in the Bible weeping by the river Babylon. And then also there is a reference to the fisher king fishing for regeneration of his brother, and of Ferdinand mourning the death of his father, the king. So water and fishing are symbols of transformation and regeneration. But now they have lost their spiritual significance. The rivers have become dirty, and you can see that slimy rats are creeping over there. The dead bodies are floating on the river. You can also remember that in the recent Corona times, in the Ganga, so many dead bodies were thrown, and you could see the piles of dead bodies moving in the river. So nothing has changed. The wasteland remains the same. So there is all spiritual degeneration in the modern wasteland. And it is again further symbolized by Mrs. Porter and her daughter, who are washing their feet in soda water. This is not for spiritual purification, but to make them look fairer, to look beautiful, so that they can attract more male customers. So this passage which is there reminds us of all these things that are taking place in the modern wisdom. So there is only lust, there is no pure love seen in the modern wasteland. Then you have a reference to Mr. Eugenides. He is a merchant who has one eye, and this one eye symbolizes sexuality, the other eye symbolizes religion, but it has lost its function. So this is the representation which is done in the section now. Then you have relations between two sexes, that is the homosexuality, which is also depicted in this particular section. There is description of poverty, and there is description of, you can say, the relationship that takes place. Sex has degenerated. There is no love, no pleasure. There is a reference to a typist who comes home after putting in a lot of hard work, and she's waited eagerly like a taxi throbbing for the evening. And she returns home. It is evening, it is dusk, the violet hour. The sailor comes home. You can also see the description of poverty in the poetry. The food is kept in tin pots, again, in the modern wasteland. Her dry clothes are piled up. That particular divan where her clothes are piled up, it is also her bed for the night. And her lover arrives over there, and he makes love and he leaves. But all these things are so mechanical that there is no love. And she's glad when the act is over. She gets up and she arranges her hair and puts up the powder. Then you can also see the three daughters of the Thames. This reference again is very, very symbolic. The first, these three daughters of the Thames are the three girls living on the banks of the Thames River, and they are singing together. The first of the three daughter who is there says that she actually bemoans the loss of her purity and virginity by a man, and she symbolizes the ugliness of the modern civilization, because we've already seen that all these picnic pots which are there were the picnic pots where she lost her virginity. The second daughter of Thames faces extreme humiliation after the loss of her virginity. She was walking on the streets of London, and her heart is under her feet. She suffers from extreme humiliation. Her lover wept after the event and promised to turn over the new leaf, but she did not say anything. What should I resent, she says. This frustration, sense of helplessness. The third girl was undone on Margaret's Sands, a seaside, which is a pleasure spot in London. She's frustrated, and she says that I have nothing and nothing is to be added. So her life is so valueless that it is a cipher. Cipher means it is zero. So all these things are responsible for the spiritual death in the modern times. And this degeneration can be seen in all the sections of the society, the rich, the middle class, the poor. And regeneration can only come if the modern humanity listens to the teachings of the religious teachers from both the East and the West, as mentioned in the beginning of the section, that is Saint Augustine and Lord Buddha. These are the famous lines, so let us go through it. Now coming to the death by water. This is one of the shortest sections, and it symbolizes, or you can say, as I said, that water symbolizes purification and regeneration. But in the modern wasteland of desolation, this function has been lost, and there is only pursuit of wealth, profit and loss, and pleasure. In the first section, there was a card of the Phoenician sailor. Now, Phoebus was young, tall, handsome, but he was drowned because his life was only a sordid round of business activity and pleasure without any spiritual motivation. He was actually caught in a whirlpool, and this reference again has to the vegetation god, who was supposed to pass through the various stages of life in reverse order. Means when we are born, we are a baby, then we become a child and all those things. But in a reverse order, it was that he was born old, when he was immersed in water. He is young as he rises, falls on the wave, then a boy, and is finally reborn. But there is no rebirth for the Phoenician sailor of the modern humanity, because there is modern or moral degeneration. And there is no remedy for them, but they have to be guided by moral and spiritual principles. And they have to turn the wheel of life themselves, which will lead them to spiritual consideration. So all those pack of tarot cards had those different cards can be seen to be symbolic in all the sections of the wasteland that they come. Now again, these are the most important lines from the Death by Water. You can go through it. Coming to the last section, what the thunder said. This is the final section, a very, very important one, which gives you the relief that there is rebirth possible. And it is possible for the modern wastelander to come out of this, you can say, frustration, degeneration. And it has to pass through different stages, undergo suffering, and then purify itself. In the Upanishads, it was told that once there was the land was threatened by famine. There was drought everywhere. There was a lot of suffering. At that particular time, Prajapati spoke in thunder to his devotees and pointed out the way to salvation. And therefore, this particular section, what the thunder said, is very, very important, because it gives the readers the way to spiritual rebirth and how these teachings are important. And this particular wisdom is based on the spirituality lessons that we have from the Indian philosophy. Now, in the first passage, we see the scene of Christ's arrest by the enemies. The Christ was surrendered by dirty, sweating crowds. They were having burning torches in their hands. And there is a reference to red. What does red signify? Red signifies violence and terror. So there was death-like silence everywhere after the arrest of Jesus Christ. Then there is a reference to the word garden, which suggests death of the fertility god in the vegetation ceremonies. So Christ underwent a lot of agony in the palace of Roman governor, and he was interrogated in the prison, and it was rumored that Christ is to be released. There was a lot of demonstration over there. Christ was crucified. However, the poet says that his crucifixion was not real death, because Christ lived on through his religion in the hearts of thousands and thousands of his disciples. But we in the 20th century have actually crucified him, killed him in reality by our indifference. We are only living physically. Spiritually, we are dead. We do not have any spirituality left in us. So there is indifference to even religion and to Christ also. So because of that, what is the consequence of all these things? What is the result of all these things? Is that we are dying a slow death, and patiently we are suffering and bearing all the consequences. Now, in the passage, there is a reference that here is no water but only rock. This suggests the journey of Sir Percival or Parsifal, the quester, who went to the kingdom of Kingfisher to search the Holy Grail. I have already made all these references clear in the beginning. And this was the night and his followers reached the mountain top, which is the Chapel Perilous, in which the Grail was lost. And there had been no rains for a long time. It was a scene of barrenness. Everywhere there were only rocks, and they were looking like gaps in the mouth. There was no silence also, because unpleasant noise of the wind was passing through the dried grass. Insects, they were singing. That singing was also disturbing. It was not pleasant. And there was only sound of thunder, but no rains. So only the thunder was heard. And as the searchers climbed the hill near the chapel, they have hallucinations and they see a red ghostly figure before them. But these were the experiences of the searchers, because they had gone in search for truth and spiritual salvation. Because this path of spirituality is difficult, and all those who follow it, they have to undergo a lot of suffering. And you can only hear the cry of water, water. There is again reference to the journey of the disciples of Christ during the journey to Emmaus, the evil land of Bible. And one of the disciples see a hooded figure. Again, this has a reference to one of the cards in the first section, that you have a hooded figure there. So all these hallucinations are seen by the people who have undertaken journey. It is only during the last stages of the journey that the doubts of the disciples of Christ are removed and Christ appears to them in prison. So Eliot has described two journeys, and these two journeys have a definite purpose also. Now, there is also a description of modern humanity, uprooted. Everywhere the society is breaking up, whether it be Eastern Europe or any place you can see. You can see the cracks in the earth. And there is only desolation, nightmare everywhere. And you can also see a woman fiddling music on her own black hair. You can see bats. People are going to the church. Hymns are being sung. Bells are still there. Bells are still tall. But all this is hypocrisy. Real faith is not there. So humanity has become or has grown godless, and spirituality is dead. There is only empty system. System means vessels and exhausted well. See, if you relate it with today's situation also, we see this wasteland even in our city now. So this is the modern wasteland without any hope for regeneration. Now there is all hopelessness, and in that particular time, you see a cock crowing, which means that the end of night is there and the birth of morning will be there. There is a flash of lightning, and with the flash of lightning, you hear the damp wind. That means rains are near the corner, indicating the arrival of rain. And when rains come, there is fertility. And this fertility means that even the fertility of Kingfisher would come back. And Eliot has recommended a three-way path. And he says that this particular path he has got from the divine teachings of the Indian philosophers. And what is this three-way path? He says da, da, da. What is the first da? Data. First da means data, means to give. We must give ourselves to some noble cause. See, there are so many people who are suffering. We see them near to us. We don't have to do much, but we can give ourselves to the noble cause. We can help them. We can also give some service to them. And if you do that, if you come one step forward, I think this will lead to a noble cause, and this will also make you satisfied. And this is the first thing that he has said, to give, means to give ourselves to some noble cause. And if you come forward with a human heart, this will lead to spiritual satisfaction. It will lead to a sense of satisfaction, and then it will definitely uh, make you more humble and more. Your life would be more meaningful. Then the second dam is Dayadvam. You should sympathize with people. What do you see in the modern times? People are self-centered. They live in the shell of their own. Me, my family, that's all. Not that way. You cannot live within the limited world of your own. You cannot isolate yourself from others. Sympathy means uh, sympathizing with others, giving them, you can say, you can help them so that they can overcome their sorrows. So this is important in this particular times of the modern wastelanders. We can achieve our spiritual salvation only if we are not self-centered. Otherwise, we are like Cornelius, who was a Roman leader. He was very much self-centered. We have to learn the lesson of spiritual oneness so that we can have spiritual rebirth. The third dha means Damyanta. That means self-control and discipline. So you should have control over your emotions, your feelings, and you should also have a disciplined way of life. It does not mean that you lose freedom. It means that you make the journey of your life more easier, more smoother. A disciplined heart is like a boat which sails very smoothly. And spiritual discipline implies control over our senses, desires, and life becomes very, very happy. So the poet gives a personal note and tells people that this dead humanity has hope for spiritual salvation. In all the four sections, you see that there was no hope for salvation. But in the fifth section, we see that the people of the modern wasteland still have the hope for salvation. The falling of the London Bridge symbolizes a spiritual and social degeneration in the wasteland. So poet turns back to the dead land, fishing over there, again symbolizes regeneration. And then uh, in the end, you can say that in the end, he reminds the humanity of the teachings of the Upanishads. And in this way alone, I think we can have absolute peace. The peace which can give you understanding, it can be achieved. And then this particular section ends not on the note of despair, frustration, but with a message of hope to the inhabitants of the modern desolate wasteland. Spiritual regeneration is possible. Poet points out the way to it, that is Data, Dayadvam, and Damyanta. That means to give, to sympathize, and to self-control. And if you do that, there will be Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. That means spiritual regeneration will definitely take place. And this hope the modern wastelanders do have. Now, these are the important characters which I have already discussed with him: Tyresses, the fisher king, the Phoenician sailor, Madame Sosostris, Albert, Lil, Mary, Stetson, Vigilance, and the important references to Ganga, Thames, city of Vienna, Church, Magnus, Martyr, Data, Dayadom, Om Shanti. So I hope that I could cover this particular poetry because it is a very huge task and there are a lot of references. Only summarizing does not help. We have to go line by line because, as I said, that the poet has used poetic shorthand and it carries a lot of meaning. But because of the constraint of time and online sessions, we could not do it online. But I would really love to take up this poetry line by line and explain it to you. Now, coming to the second coming, that is W.B. Yeats's poetry. I will just sum up this particular poetry. What is the theme of this particular poetry? The theme of the poetry is death of the old world. And the poet says that it should be followed by rebirth of a new world. We've already seen that there is death over there, but here W.B. Yeats is hopeful that there is rebirth of a new one. And there are a lot of biblical symbolisms which are taking place of the second coming of Christ to make it a point. The second coming was intended by Yeats to describe the current historical moment in terms of Gaius. Yeats believed that the world was on the threshold of apocalyptic revelation as history reached the end of the autumn and began moving with the inner Gaia. Now there is a reference to the falcon who is separated from the falconer. It is lost without any reason, without ruler, without larger cause. It is a symbol of for a lost humanity at the mercy of uncontrollable forces. So, as the title suggests, the poet Yeats suggests that this is a prophetic poem. It shows clearly the Christ's second return to the earth after the world has been engulfed in sin and sorrow. There are a lot of images used in this poetry, and it creates a sense of waiting and arouses the reader's interest in what the second coming is. Now, this is a sonnet, Leda and the Swan. Sonnet is a 14-line poetry, and it is one of the most perfect poems ever written by Yeats. It is very artistic, and there is a picturesque and dramatic presentation of the story of Leda and the Swan, which is taken from the Greek mythology. Now, according to the Greek story, Leda was the mother of the mankind. Zeus or Jupiter appeared to her in the form of a swan and made love to her. Out of this population of the human and the superhuman of God and woman were born the great heroes and the heroines who created Athenian civilization and whose exploits have been narrated in the great Homeric epics. Now, who are they? Leda became the mother of Helen, Castor and Pollux and Clytemnestra, and the population of Jupiter and Leda, in other words, set in motion a train of events which resulted in the destruction of the Trojan war and the various events which are narrated in the Aeschylean tragedies. So the poem which is there is very, very suggestive, rich, and it suggests the superhuman intervention of the human affairs at critical moments. In this way, it puts us in mind of Virgin Mary and her dove and the coming of Christ 2,000 years ago. Civilization was born, and now the second cycle is drawing to a close, and superhuman intervention must take place once again in some form or the other. Thus, you can say that mythology gets linked up with its vision of the future mankind, and it puts us in mind that beautiful women have always been destructive. And the witness for the example he has given by naming Helen and Clytemnestra. The image of Helen evokes the image of Morgon in the French Revolution, another destructive woman who hurled little streets upon the great. In this way, past is fused with the present, and the poet succeeds in compressing the whole ages in small relic of 14 times. So these two poems again are very, very symbolic in nature, very important. I hope I could do justice to what I was assigned to. I thank you very much for patiently listening to them. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for your very interesting presentation. You explained the poem, The Wasteland, in detail, along with all the topics prescribed in the background section. Thank you so much for your wonderful presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you.